produced with their body and mind. And that's a claim on the body and mind, you know? And people don't ever look at it from this perspective of getting it down to brass tacks, getting down to the underlying, philosophy, getting down to the underlying principles about right and wrong behavior. They only look at the external manifestations, and they look at, what if we didn't have this kind of legislation and we didn't have taxation, how would we do this or that or the other thing? Well, it doesn't make a difference if how you're doing this, that, or the other thing is based on violence, is based on theft, is based on slavery. It's immoral, and that methodology should be thrown out, and it shouldn't be accepted as valid, because anything that's immoral is invalid. And you have a society that just looks the other way. They have been totally conditioned to accept things, as they are on their face value, as they've been told that they are. They never look at it from a deeper philosophical standpoint of principles, of moral principles.
Spy on Americans in order to find terrorism and violate their rights, and milking this whole 9/11, the families, and I went to the funerals and all of that stuff. That I'm sorry, I believe that 9/11 was an inside job without a doubt.
Christie is just a dangerous Nazi. I'll come right out and say it. I mean, this guy is absolutely sick, and what he wants to do to the American public, spying on them and taking more rights away from them, based on this ridiculous story of the 9/11 attacks, that not one part of it makes sense with any other part of it. Still, believing it in his, absolute insane mindset, and all the fearful, naive people out there who still buy into the official story of 9/11, and don't understand the concept, the strategy of a false flag attack, and what it is designed to do, how it's designed to polarize people, how it's designed to get people behind wars of aggression, how it's designed to get people behind the seizing of rights from, the average person, by keeping them in that dynamic of fear of, some kind of evil enemy coming to get them, or, that you need protection from. All, once again, fear-based mindsets. The entire dynamic is always one of fear, and then stepping in as the savior to provide the solution, which always results in more control, more enslavement of the population. And the public, unfortunately, is still too naive and too dumb to understand the tactic. They're too dumb to understand the technique, sadly. They ascribe their moral sensibilities to other people, and that's a big mistake to make, to think because you wouldn't do something evil, that someone else wouldn't do something that's evil. Yeah. And they want to give their responsibility to protect themselves over to others. That's the whole concept of government, is, the whole idea. You'll hear minarchists even say things to the effect like, well, the whole purpose of government is to protect freedom, is to protect civil liberties. Well, if you assign that role to a select group of people, are you not, for many, many, many people, giving up that personal responsibility? And therein lies the entire problem. You cannot give away personal responsibility for your own protection to someone else, for your own community's protection to anyone else. This is why we're living with a militarized police force that constitutes a standing army among the population right now.
It's a completely dysfunctional, codependent, relationship, and
sure.
And the problem always keeps coming back to the same thing: is our disconnection from natural law and fitness. And it's like, once we're disconnected from natural law and how it works, this sickness is just going to constantly keep perpetuating itself.
This is wanting to be taken care of and protected. So, the nurturing and caring dynamic is the motherly aspect of a familial dynamic. And then the protective aspect is the masculine or fatherly dynamic of within the familial system. And this is what government always props itself up as, the surrogate family. You know, this is what order followers see the cult of government as. You know, that's why they even join this cult, and that's why they obey its dictates. They actually believe that government is trying to take care of people like a family. Okay, when in fact all it wants to do is control. It is a dysfunctional relationship.
Right,
it's a relationship based on masters and slaves, on authority, and those who must obey it, which is a master and a slave. And people don't understand it as such, you know, and that's because in some form, the real family dynamic has been destroyed, and people have been let down by that family dynamic, and so they are searching subconsciously, psychologically, for the surrogate family, which then the government steps in as the role of, for many leftists, okay, for many Democrat types, it steps in as the motherly figure, the provider. You'll notice that the leftists and the Democrats, they all want government to be like that nurturing, caring provider. They want it to take care of everybody, okay? And you'll see that the people on the right, you know, the conservative right-wing types, they want government to act as the protector, to go out and police the world and keep everybody safe from everybody else somehow. That's how government's going to work out. And we'll do that by even taking freedom away from people, taking their civil liberties away and spying on them, because it's our role to keep them safe. This is like Big Daddy, you know, it's the father figure, you know, and this surrogate role, people haven't even looked at why is there only two political parties? Because one is the mother and one's the father. One's the surrogate mother in the dysfunctional relationship. One's the surrogate father in the dysfunctional relationship. It all comes down to people really not being grown up, taking full personal responsibility for their own behavior and their own protection. Yep. And stop looking to external power, stop looking to external surrogate family members, their surrogate parents. That's what government has psychologically become in most people's minds. That's why they're so attached to it. They're attached to it like a non-grown child, okay? A small child is attached to a parental relationship. They don't want to grow up and take personal responsibility for their own behavior and their own protection.
Well, right. I mean, I was going to say with the child, it's not that they don't want to. It's that they're not being raised that way. They can't break people on their behalf after what these people did, you know, for the public.
Right.
Like, yeah. I'm like, well, you know, so
it seems to me that San Francisco doesn't need its easier access to marijuana. More of it, just so that people who smoke it don't even have to go down the street. But there are lots of similarities between our societies as well, and one of the, I suppose, most gratifying things since The Strange Death of Europe came out in June here in the US is a number of people who have come over to me and written to me from America, from Canada, from Australia, and said, this book is about us, isn't it? And perhaps I could start by just saying a little about what it is about, and you'll get some of the resonances. The Strange Death of Europe centers on the 2015 migration crisis, which you'll all remember was the moment when Angela Merkel massively exacerbated an already existing problem by announcing unilaterally that the external and internal borders of Europe were basically dissolved. In a single act, the mass movement of people that had been going on for decades sped up exponentially, so that Germany in a single year took in an additional 2% of its population, that Sweden took in an additional almost 3% of its population. This is all part of a pattern, I say, that has been going on for many decades, and just like those previous decades, what happened after the 2015 crisis was that politicians and the media found excuses to justify something that would have happened anyway. So, for instance, German citizens and others were told that they actually this mass migration, millions of people into Europe, would be a net economic gain for their society, that it would enrich their society. Now, actually, all of the studies that I've gone over in this show that, at best, most such migration cannot be called to be any kind of economic gain. A study in Britain showed that over a 15-year period, migrants took out 95 billion more in services than they put in taxation. And of course they would. If you go to another country, you don't speak the language, you don't have the skills, it's going to be a very long time before you've put in anything into the welfare system remotely like the amount that you and your family will have taken out. But this is one of the arguments that are made. And by the way, just as in all of the decades after the war, so in the post-2015 moment, the governments that came up with these explanations had to hedge around the facts, so that just like the Labour government after 1997, they had to pretend that the average migrant was a Luxembourgian hedge funder. And this is just one of the lies that gets told to the people. Because once that one is shot down, once, for instance, you notice that the number of people who've been added to Germany's welfare bill in the last year is almost exactly the number of the people who came in 2015. Once you go over that lie, you get to another one, which the German people and others were told, which is that we are an aging population, we are a greying population, and that therefore we need, obviously, to bring people in to keep us and our society into the standards to which we've become accustomed. Of course, this argument always ignores one extraordinary thing which none of the politicians ever seem to be able to recognise, which is the startling fact that migrants get old as well. It's amazingly enough, it's not just us Europeans who suffer the ageing process. Who knew? But of course, if you do believe in that idea, that you need to keep on bringing people to keep yourself in the custom that you're now used to, you get what I describe as the pyramid problem in migration. You keep having to bring in more and more people all the time to keep yourselves in that a sustainable societal moment. But so once you get the one of, well, okay, maybe they don't make us richer, maybe the aging population thing doesn't work, you get to another one, which is diversity. It doesn't matter if we're financially poorer. It doesn't matter because we're so much more culturally rich. Now, I should say that there is something in this. What society, the Europeans certainly wouldn't do, is what society doesn't want to know as much of interest and culture as the world has to offer. Who doesn't want to know as much about the world and about the ideas of the world as possible? But, of course, the first person from, for instance, India to bring Indian cuisine into the UK does an interesting service, vimms up the local cuisine. It's not the case that the next 100 Indians who come in, for instance, bring 100 times more interesting cuisine. It's not the case that the first Sudanese poet who enters the UK massively brings interest to your country, and that the next 1,000 people from Sudan continue to just bring ever richer versions of the poetry of Sudan. And by the way, please don't ask me to name my favourite Sudanese poet. But this is just a part of that lie. They also say, you also notice, by the way, that this is always a one-way street. Not once in my adult life have I heard anybody say that the thing that Eritrea needs most is an injection of Welshmen. that they just could do with some Welsh cooking. Or singing. Nobody says this. Nobody says, as Mark Stein and I were saying in the conversation recently, nobody says, the thing that the Somalis really need is a bit more Bach. I actually think it'd be nice for them if they had a bit more Bach. But nobody thinks that's an appropriate way to say it. But Europeans are told there's something hollow at our heart, as if we in Europe, the culture of Dante and Goethe and Bach, has some kind of diminishment, something hollow.